Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Gimel. Lo Mitzvah Hashem. Today, we will be learning Daf Kuf Chaf Hey Amid Beis. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Shabbos. We pick up today on Kuf Chaf Hey Amid Beis. Actually, no. We pick up today on Kuf Chaf Hey Amid Aleph in the very bottom line of the Shulchan Aruch, Siman Shin Tesva Sif Yud Gimel. In the middle of the Sif, the last two words of the Shulchan Aruch on the page, Vahani Mili. Our learning should be a schus Refuah Shalema from a Shemer ben Esther Fradl, Yitzchak ben Sion ben Dusha, Avram ben Sion ben Sarah Liba, Chavadasa bas Serel, Rivka bas Shiraleah. They should have a Refuah Shalema, Beser Shar Chel Yisrael. Our learning should be a schus for Achenu Beis Yisrael, Hanusunim bat Sarah bat Shivya, Ha'imdim ben Bayam ben Bayabasha, Hamakim Yerachim Aleihem, V'yotziem Yitzar L'Rvacha Me'afel L'Oira Mishibur L'Geula Hashta Bagalo V'Zman Kariv and Emar Main. Our learning should be a schus for Yonasim ben Michal, Yoel ben Michal. The Rebbeinu Shalom should watch over them, together with all of our other brothers and sisters who find themselves in harm's way. And the Rebbeinu Shalom should be Noikim, the Nekama, Nikmas Amo Yisrael, from all of their enemies, and take Nekama from those who attack us. Okay, says the Mechaber, Siman Shin Tesvav Sif Yud Gimel Vahani Mili. Bottom last two words on the page, Kuf Chaf Hey and Aleph. Says the Mechaber, Vahani Mili Kishahakuba Chasera Tefach. Over here in Sif Yud Gimel, the Mechaber introduced us the potential problem of making an oil by a keli. In the very beginning of Sif Yud Gimel, the words of the Mechaber were, if you want to take a beged, if you want to take some kind of a cloth, or I used the example of silver foil, and you want to put it over a large container, the Mechaber said that you should not cover the entire top of the container, of the keli. You should only cover it partially. You should leave part of it open so that you're not forming any kind of oil over the interior of the keli. The Mishnah Berurah told us that this is really only speaking about very, very large kelim. Now the Mechaber makes another point here. The Mechaber says, Vahani Mili, Kishahakuba, Pirish Kli. This is only true when the kuba, which is a word for some kind of a very large vat, Chasera Tefach. This is only true if there is a tefach of open space between the cover and the contents of the vat. So if you have a vat, and the vat, let's say, is full of water, and it's full of water all the way up to the tippy top, and now you spread out a beged, or you cover the vat with tinfoil, you're not making an oil. An oil has to be a covering over a minimal amount of airspace. That minimum amount of airspace is a tefach. So the only time this could be a problem, says the Mechaber, is if the vat is not completely full, so that from the top of the vat's contents until the top of the vat and the underside of the covering, there is at least a tefach. Aval im eina chaser tefach, but if the contents of the vat are not missing a tefach, mutter, then it can't be a problem over here, the ein kan oil, because then you're not creating an oil over anything. Now I just realized I read the rest of the Mechaber here in Sif Yud Gimel, and indeed, that's what we were up to in the Mechaber, but we did not finish Mishnah Berurah Ois Kat Mem Ches. So here, on Kuf Chaf Hey Amid Beis, in my print, if you go down 3 lines into the Mishnah Berurah, the last word of the line is V'chein, and that's where we're up to in the Mishnah Berurah. So we learned the Mishnah Berurah yesterday. The Mishnah Berurah spoke about what he calls in Yiddish a tishkestel, which we said is the drawer that slides in under a tabletop. And the Mishnah Berurah explained that by such a drawer, there could be a problem of creating an oil. If the drawer has mechitzas all the way around, right? The drawer is essentially a self-contained box. And if the drawer has a depth of a tefach, so then when you slide the drawer in under the tabletop, what you're doing is you're putting the mechitzos in place, the mechitzas of the drawer, and you're putting them underneath the oil, the gag of the tabletop. So the Mishnah Berurah said that could be a problem. Now the Mishnah Berurah gives another case that he says potentially could be a problem. The chein mita, a type of bed, shekarin shlofbank, that they called back in the day a sleeping bench. Sheyesh la kisui, this essentially was a very large box. So a box the size of a bed. Okay? So let's say it's a twin shlofbank. So it's 39 inches wide and it's 70 inches long, and it's a box. It's got mechitzas all the way around, and it's got a floor, and then it's got a lid that you put on the top. And now if you want to sleep on it, I guess you put a blanket on the top of this, and you go to sleep on it. So says the Mishnah Berurah, v'chein mita shekarin shlofbank, sheyesh lo kisui, this is essentially a box that has a cover. Ve'eina mechuberes bitzirim. And back in the day, the way they made these apparently was that the cover was not attached to the box with hinges. So the cover was a separate piece. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ein lahachzer aleha kisui, you would not be allowed to pick up the kisui and put it on top of the box. Yesh bazeh mishum asiyas oil, because, says the Mishnah Berurah, this would constitute a problem of asiyas oil. Excuse me. Nevertheless, says the Mishnah Berurah, we should not object to those who are makel and do put the cover onto something like the shlofbank, because they have who to rely on. Haim das harayvid v'harashba, that would be the opinion of the Ravid and the Rashba, she'avi l'kamon b'sif katan memtes, that the Mishnah Berurah is going to quote in the coming Mishnah Berurah, ois katan memtes, v'gam das Bach, and this would also be the opinion of the Bach, ayin sham, he sends us to the Bach to take a look at the words of the Bach, v'ayin b'bir halacha, and he also tells us to look at the bir halacha, dibur hamaschel al pi, that gives us more details to this halacha. Moving along to Sifkat Mentes, says the Mishnah Berurah, Chaser Tefach, you could only have this problem of asiyas oil if there is an airspace of a tefach from the top of the contents of the vat to the underside of the cover that you're putting on. Says the Mishnah Berurah, the words Chaser Tefach, which literally mean that the vat is, in order for there to be a problem, the vat has to be lacking a tefach. What does that mean, says the Mishnah Berurah? Kalaymar, that is to say, she'ena malaya. The vat is not full to the top. Dim kain, because were the vat to be full all the way to the top, ein kan oil, then there would be no issue of an oil over here, because you're not covering, you're not being mahil, you're not sheltering over any empty space. Ella b'shechasera, this is only a problem if the vat is missing some contents, so that sheyesh me'akisui ad masha b'seichakuba tefach, so that from the underside of the covering until the top, the surface of the contents, you have a tefach. Misham haki mikri oil, because that would make the cover constitute an oil. Now, in the previous Mishnah Berurah, the Mishnah Berurah told us there's a Ravid and a Rashba that are, and a Bach that are makel with all of this. Says the Mishnah Berurah, V'dasa Ravid var Rashba, it is the opinion of the Ravid and the Rashba. The Bechal Gavni ein b'kisi keli mishum oil. They are under the opinion that covering a keli never creates a problem of oil. And this that we find in the Gemara in Masechta Shabbos, that the Gemara says there are times when it is usher to cover a kuva, says the Mishnah Berurah, mipnei shenireh kemishamer. The Ravid and the Rashba held that Gemara that says that you can't spread out a fabric over a large vat has nothing to do with the question of oil. It has a question of, it looks like you're about to go strain wine. It looks like you're spreading a filter over the top of the vat, and now you're going to pour contents through the filter. It looks like you're trying to filter out the dregs of the wine. Having said that, the Mishnah Berurah is of the opinion that we should be machmer like the Shulchan Aruch, shehi das harbe rishonim, V'alkein, and therefore chavis gedola shalmayim, if you have a very large vat of water, ein lechasaisa kula b'Shabbos, you should not cover the entire top of the vat, kishe'ena malaya kula, if the vat is not completely full. However, those who are noik to be makel, ein limchais b'yadam, you should not object, sheyesh lehem al milismaich, because they have who to rely on, the chanal b'seif sif cotton memches. This is, as I stated previously in the Mishnah Berurah, ois cotton memches, you have the Ravid and the Rajba, etc. The Paiskim also say that, let's just remember, when it comes to something like the Schlafbank, I remember when I was young and growing up in the Sfaradi Shul in Borough Park on 14th Avenue, they had benches that had tops that were hinged, and you opened up the bench, and inside there was a very large storage area. They used to actually keep talesim in there. Now, that's also, it's like a large keli with a lid, but over there we wouldn't have a problem, because like the Mishnah Berurah said, this is never a problem by a lid sheyesh lo tzirim. If it's hinged, it's not a problem, because once the cover is hinged, we look at this like a door. The same way opening and closing the door to the house is not a problem. It's not called being moisef al habinyan, right? When you close the door, clearly this is meant to be open and closed. This doesn't constitute making an oil. You're not building a shelter when you close the door. This is something that's going to be closed, open, closed, open. Paiskim also say that if the lid has a handle, so again, it's very clearly meant to be taken off and put back, and taken off and put back. There are Paiskim who also say that when something is clearly a dedicated lid for a specific keli, that also is a variable leheter. So there are a lot of heterim over here. And again, if somebody actually has a question of covering something exceptionally large, it's kedai to go ask a Rav. But in a general sense, 30,000 feet from a general sense, we usually don't have an issue of oihel when it comes to covering kalim. Okay, moving along to Siman Shin Tezayin. Tzeda ha'asura umuteres b'Shabbos. The halachas that pertain to trapping that is forbidden on Shabbos, and trapping that is permissible on Shabbos. Uba yud beis seifim, and here we have 12 seifim. Now, before we even go into the mechaber, I think there's one general rule when it comes to trapping that is worthwhile to mention right away at the outset. One of the avos malachos is tzad, trapping. Now, the question is, how high is the bar of trapping? What constitutes an act of trapping? What do I mean? Well, for example, the very first halacha that we're going to learn here in Shin Tezayin is that there's something called a tzipar dror. A tzipar dror is a specific type of bird. It's a small bird that flits around very, very quickly and is difficult to catch. This is not a bird that you could easily catch. Even if this bird would be inside your house, it's the kind of thing where you have a bird in your house. Go ahead, good luck. Try to catch it. Every time you get near it, it goes flitting around. So if you have a tzipar dror, if you have such a small type of bird, and it's flitting around outside, and for some reason you want it in your house, and somehow you go ahead and you trick it to come into your house, and it comes into your house, and now you close the door and you close the window, you did not accomplish tzad midaraisa. This would not be a transgression of the daraisa of tzeda, of trapping. Why? Because the bird is not trapped. The same way the bird was not trapped when it was outside. If you wanted to catch it while it was outside, good luck. Now it's in your house. Go ahead. You want to try to catch it while it's inside your house? Weiter, good luck. You're not going to be able to catch it. Every time you get near it, it's going to flit from that corner to that corner, etc., etc. So by getting it into the house, you really did not trap it. How do you trap a tzipar dror? So the Mechaber is going to tell us, if you have a little wooden birdhouse and you persuade or trick the bird to go into the little wooden birdhouse, now it's trapped. Because now when the bird is in the confines of a little wooden birdhouse. If you want that bird, you'll open the door, you'll stick your hand in, and you'll take the bird. So now the bird is trapped. So what I'm trying to show you is there is a minimum bar that you have to reach in order for trapping to constitute trapping. Just because you restricted the motion of an animal, so before the bird was outside, now you got it into your house, and now it's restricted to the interior of your house, restricting the movement or the amount of space that the bird has is not necessarily trapping it. Now, it would be an Issa B'Drabanan, but an Issa B'Daraisa, it wouldn't be. And that's what we're going to see right away here in the Mechaber. That rule is really what's going to take us through the rest of this year. Says the Mechaber Sif Aleph. Hatzad tzipar dror, if somebody traps a small, quick-moving bird, limigdal, to a little wooden birdhouse, shehu nitzoid boi, in which it would be trapped. Right? That's what I was explaining to you. The tzipar dror is not trapped when you get it inside your house, but it is trapped when you get it into the migdal. When you get it into the little wooden birdhouse, now it's trapped. That's what Mechaber means here. Hatzad tzipar dror, if you trap a tzipar dror, limigdal shehu nitzoid boi, into a little wooden birdhouse in which it is trapped. U sha'ar tziparim, or let's say you trap other birds. This means larger, slower moving birds, which would include, let's say, a chicken, right? Those are much larger and much slower moving. Utzvi, or a wild animal like a deer. Labayas, into a house. Oy lebibar, or into a pen. An enclosure. A bibar is a pen. Shehem nitzoidim bai, in which such animals would be trapped. In other words, the Mechaber is drawing a distinction between the tzipar dror and larger, slower-moving birds or large animals. In order for a tzipar dror to be considered trapped, you got to get it into the small wooden migdal. In there, it's trapped. But a bigger, slower-moving bird can be considered trapped when you get it in your house. It's bigger, it's slower-moving, it's easier to catch. So once you get it into your house, you may have already reached the bar of Tzeda Midaraisa. A deer is considered trapped once you get it into a pen. Once you get it into a fenced-in pen, of course it's going to depend how big the pen is, right? But once you get it into a fenced-in pen, it is considered trapped. The tzipar also, the larger birds, could also be trapped in a pen. But in that case, the pen would have to have a roof. By the deer, the pen doesn't have to have a roof. By birds, the pen would have to have a roof. But in any of these cases, says the Mechaber, chayiv, this would be an issa daraisa of tzad. Vim einoi nitzoid boi, but if you get the animal into an area within which it is not considered trapped, so you get a tzipar dror into the house. Tzipar dror is not considered trapped inside the house. Then potter avalasa. Then it's potter. You wouldn't be chayav karbachatos because this wouldn't be an issa daraisa aval aser, but it still is prohibited because it is an issa darabanan. Okay. Boy, sometimes I really wish I was one of those Magidei Shir who knew how to moderate his voice and say everything in a nice, calm, gentle way. But then you could listen to somebody else's shir. Okay. Says the Mishnah Berurah Cotton Aleph. Hatzod. The opening line here of the Mechaber was speaking about somebody who trapped a tzipar dror into a little wooden birdhouse. Hatzod, says the Mishnah Berurah, what does this mean? Hainu. Shepasach shar hamigdoil. You had this birdhouse. You opened up the door of the birdhouse. The bird is not in the birdhouse. The bird is outside. You had the birdhouse. You opened up the door. V'asa tachbulais, and you used tricks. You used bait, motions, whatever tricks you know. Ad shenichnas atzipar l'soichai, until you lured the bird inside the birdhouse. V'sagar alav, and now you close the door. Oh, now you have accomplished tzeidah midaraisa. And says the Mishnah Berurah, this is true. Even though you haven't grabbed the bird with your hand, in other words, the Mishnah Berurah is telling you, do not think that in order to accomplish tzeidah midaraisa, you have to actually physically grab the bird with your hand. No, you don't. You just have to put it into a situation where it is restricted, it is confined, and if you want to grab it, you'll be able to grab it. So if you opened up the door to the birdhouse and you baited the bird and you lured the bird into the birdhouse and you closed the door, you have now accomplished tzeidah. Ki b'sagrai hamigdal, when you close the door to the birdhouse, nigmara hatzeidah, you have completed the act of trapping midaraisa. Aval, however, b'mashech nisay l'bayis, by luring a tzipar drar into the house, afilu abayis cotton, even if it's a relatively small house, v'gam chaloynois of stumin, and all the windows in the house are closed, adayin einoy nitzoid. The tzipar drar is not considered to be trapped. She'tivai shelat tzipar drar, because it is the nature of this type of small, quick-moving bird, she'eino mekabel moros, that it doesn't accept your mastery. It's not nichnat to you. V'dar b'bayis kibasada, and it will comport itself inside your house the same way it comports itself outside of the field. Shenishmat mizavis lazavis, it's going to flit around from one corner of the house to the other corner of the house. Ve'enim yechaylev l'tafsai, and you're not going to be able to grab it. So the same way you weren't able to grab it outside, you're not going to be able to grab it inside. And therefore, by getting it into the house, you didn't accomplish tzeidah midaraisa. V'lachein einay nikra tzeidah midaraisa. Ice cotton bays, the Mechaber spoken about a migdal. Migdal does not mean tower over here. It means like a cabinet. Limigdal, shel eitz, a wooden cabinet. We don't really care what it's made out of. It could be made out of metal also. V'nasek klov gadol. It's kind of like an oversized cage. Ubibar, what's a bibar? Mikri karpifais and mukafum legadlam sham. A karpef is like a field. So, a bibar is a fenced-in pen where you raise your animals. So, go to the petting zoos, they have deer and goats and sheep walking around in fenced-in pens. That's a bibar. So that's what the halakha when it comes to a tzipar drar. Then the Mechaber spoke about sha'ar tziparim, other birds, utzvi or a deer. Mishnah Berurah makes a very important point over here. He says, litzstadin ktani. If you notice, the Mechaber lumped together sha'ar tziparim, other birds, meaning bigger, slower moving birds, and animals like a deer. He lumped them together b'machta akas, in one phrase. And he kind of, it seems, said that they have the same rule. Tzipar drar has one rule. In order to accomplish tzeidah, you have to confine it to a small birdhouse. The other birds or a deer have a different rule. Over there, once you confine them to a pen, it's already considered tzeidah. Points out the Mishnah Berurah, l'tstadin ktani. There's two different parts to this rule. Shar tziparim essentially have one rule, and it's something like a tzvi, a deer, has a different rule. How are they different? Explains the Mishnah Berurah. The tziparim, when it comes to birds, v'chein b'sha'ar oifais, or other fowl like chickens, einay chayiv atchiyah habibar v'abayis b'kurah. If you want to talk about tzeidah midaraisa on a slow-moving bird, you can't tell me that you're going to accomplish tzeidah midaraisa by getting it into a pen if the pen doesn't have a roof. If the pen doesn't have a roof, the bird is going to fly away. Even the chicken that doesn't fly so far, it will fly over the fence. So, in order to accomplish tzeidah midaraisa on other birds or on fowl, you need it to be makora. You need the pen to be roofed over. V'gam chaloynois of stumin. If there are windows, they have to be closed. Shul yakal of rayach derech sham, because otherwise they'll escape. Ubitzvi, but by a deer, usha'ar chayos, or other kind of wild, non-domesticated animals, chayiv, it would be an issa daraisa, afilu eina makura, even if the pen is not roofed over, v'gam chaloynois of psuchin, and even if it has windows and the windows are open. Ois cotton dalit. The Mechaber said, in order to be over tzeidah daraisa, then these enclosures have to be enclosures shehem nitzoidim, within which this type of animal would be considered trapped. La'afuke, this stands in contrast to, says the Mishnah Berurah, emabayis v'habibar gadol, if you get a big slow-moving bird isolated in a very big house, or a biber gadol, or you get a deer into a pen, but the pen is 3 acres large, then so that if you want to go into the pen, or you want to go into the house, and you want to grab hold of the bird, or grab hold of the deer, you will not be able to do it in one shechiyah. What's a shechiyah? Says the Mishnah Berurah, hainu beritza achas, in one sprint. Mishnah Berurah is giving us a very important rule over here, and it's interesting because really the Mishnah Berurah is taking sides here on Machlokes Rishonim. The Mishnah Berurah is telling us over here again. We need to know what is that bar that we have to meet that constitutes trapping. So the Mishnah Berurah is telling us like this: you know what constitutes trapping? You have to be able to get hold of the animal b'shchia achas. Now shchia achas, which we would literally translate as one jump. You gotta, in one lunge, you could go ahead and you could catch the animal. Shchia achas is the lashon of the Gemara. The Rishonim talk about hainu beritza achas. What does this mean? So some Rishonim learn that this means in one sprint. What does that mean in one sprint? Mishnah Berurah goes further to define it. If you can't catch it in one sprint, elitzarikli nafesh, you're going to have to take a break and you're going to have to rest. Koydem sheyagienu, before you get it. In other words, I have had to run around and catch chickens. Years ago, I had chickens in my backyard. And when I would let them range around the backyard, and then sometimes you would have to go catch them to get them into the coop. Sometimes it could be a draining experience. So sometimes they're located in an area where you can get it in one sprint. You just go and you run a few steps and you grab it and you got it. Sometimes you can chase them around the whole backyard for 10 minutes. And if you're out of shape, then yeah, you're going to have to huff and puff and take a break and then try again. That's what the Mishnah Berurah says. The Mishnah Berurah says, you know what the bar is when something is considered trapped? When you have it confined in such a small area that you could go catch it in one sprint and you don't have to take a break in the middle and take a rest and then try again, that constitutes being trapped. But if you're going to have to try and then rest and then try again and then rest, that's already not considered trapped. That's what the Mishnah Berurah is saying here. So, again, Mishnah Berurah says, the Mechaber told us that in order to accomplish Seder Midaraisa, you have to isolate the animal and restrict it to an area, shehem nitzoidim, within which the animal is trapped. Says the Mishnah Berurah, this comes to exclude emabayis v'abibar gadol. If you get a big slow-moving bird isolated in a house, but it's a big house, or you get a domesticated animal isolated in a pen, but it's a big pen, hainu beritza achas, we are not going to be able to catch it in one sprint. You're going to have to take a break before you can catch it. Then getting the bird into such an area is not considered Seder Midaraisa, even if you get it into a pen and it's roofed over and the windows are closed. Doesn't matter. If it's so big that it's going to be difficult to catch the bird, you need to accomplish Seder Midaraisa. Umemela, and what comes out of that is Hatzeidehu Sham. Let's say you have the chicken restricted to a pen, but it's a pen where you're not going to be able to catch the chicken in one sprint. And now on Shabbos, you go ahead and you run around and you catch the chicken. When you catch the chicken, you're over at Seder Midaraisa, because it wasn't Nitzaid V'Oimid. Even though it was in the pen, it wasn't considered trapped. So now when you catch it, you trapped it. And now you're doing Seder Midaraisa. That's what Mishnah Berurah means here. Umemela Hatzeidehu Sham. If you go on Shabbos and you catch the animal inside this oversized pen where it wasn't considered trapped yet, babayis or bebibar chayiv. Now you would be over in Daraisa if you catch it on Shabbos. We will discuss this at greater length. Says the Mishnah Berurah, l'sayich seifel shamayim. If you take a bucket and you go to the beach and you dip in a bucket and you catch a fish, chayiv, that's it, it's a daraisa. David Seda, that's considered trapping. Aval im akarai, but if you uproot a fish from the river or from the sea, doesn't mean that you catch it, you yank it out of the water. We'll see what it means. V'evrichai l'sayich brechas hamayim. Let's say there's a river. The river has fish in it. And then coming off the river, there's a stream. So you manage to get the fish out of the river and you direct it into the stream. Maybe it's not even a stream. Maybe it's a lake or a pond. So you got the fish out of the river and you got it isolated in the pond. Says the Mishnah Berurah, that's not considered trapping because it's the same concept. Shagam sham nishmat lechurin v'listokin. Again, it's true. It was free in the river. You isolated it now to a small pond. So you restricted its movement, and now it's in the pond, and maybe you can't get out of the pond, but could you go ahead and catch it? No. If you try to catch it, it's going to swim here, swim there, swim here, and swim there. It's like getting the tzipor drawer into the house. That's not say the daraisa. If somebody traps a lion, don't try this at home. If you trap a lion, you're not over an issa daraisa. You're only over an issa daraisa on trapping a lion if you get it locked up in its cage. Other than that, a lion is always liable to break out. So it's very hard to reach the issa daraisa level of trapping when it comes to a lion. We have one more Mishnah Berurah, but I'm done. So we're going to stop over here. We'll continue next time, Yirtzeh Hashem, with Mishnah Berurah Ois Cut and Hey. Thank you so much for joining me for Limud HaTorah. The source of Limud HaTorah should be making against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbe should send Yeshua's for us, Parnas, and Shidduchim to all those in need. We should be zeicher to see the B'yas Kal Tzedek, B'meir V'yameinu. Amen. Be well.